Hi, and welcome to the Birth and Rebirth podcast. I'm Tiffany Caligari.
And I'm Kirsten Clark. We are born again birth workers who share the birth stories of Christian women, highlighting God's perfect design.
And their testimonies of finding Jesus. Here, we will chat about many topics pertaining to birth, spirituality, and everything in between.
Let's dive in.
Hey y'all, Kirsten here. This is going to be part one of Tiffany's birth story with her daughter Seraya. It was a longer conversation, so we decided to split it up into two parts, and part two will be out next Friday. Thanks for tuning in, and y'all enjoy.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, my girl. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm a little sleepy,
Yeah,
but we're here.
we're
We're
awake. We're
here.
doing it.
So me and Kirsten record at very weird hours of the day because we both have this. And we like to record in peace and quiet. So sometimes we wake up really early to record.
Yes. And we were both just talking, and we're like, maybe we need to figure something else out because, like, our brains are not even working this early
Yeah.
in the morning.
It's definitely hit or miss. Like some mornings I wake like, okay, I can do this, and I'm like fired up, and then other days I'm like, no way, this can't be. Like
Yeah.
we need to go back to sleep.
But that's why the Lord blessed us with coffee.
Exactly, exactly. And I got mine right next to me, so I'm good. I know that you are kind of obsessed with the white chocolate raspberry
Oh,
Chobani creamer, and I just have to say that so you put me on to the Chobani creamer, but I'm not a white chocolate fan, so I saw that they have this new like limited batch coconut mocha creamer. Girl,
ooh. Is it
it is
good? I haven't tried that
it's
one.
amazing. It's amazing. Like I love coconut everything and it has such a good coconut flavor. So it's my new obsession and it makes me excited about my morning coffee.
Yeah, that's how I felt about the white chocolate raspberry, but I don't know if I can do the limited batches anymore because they're no longer selling
I
the
know.
white chocolate raspberry, and I am devastated. Like, I was
I
like,
actually
I'm so
saw it at my supermarket yesterday. I will
buy it and
send it
send
to
it to
you.
me in mail. I will pay you for the shipping.
Guys, just so you know, like I'm in upstate New York and Kirsten is in Florida, like
Yes.
Floribama. So
Yes, Floribama girl down here. And listen, that makes the early morning recording like even harsher because there's a time difference. So,
yeah.
oof.
It's
But
even rougher for Kirsten right now because it's way earlier at her time than it is my time. But
well,
nonetheless, we are going to get into it.
yes, Tiffany is going to be telling her birth story today, and I'm really excited to hear everything in detail because Tiffany and I have been friends, and I know her birth story, but I don't know like all the nitty-gritty details of what happened and what went down. So I am really excited to hear it. And yeah, Tiffany, if you just want to take it away.
Okay. So I'm very excited. I This is my first time telling my birth story of Soraya's birth from start to finish. Um, so I'm just going to, I guess I'll start from when me and my husband at the time, Soraya's father, We were, wanting to conceive. It was like something that I had been wanting for a while. Like I just had that feeling like, yep, it's time to make a baby. And we had been married for a few years, and I was like, okay, let's just do it. I have an older son, so Dylan at the time was 10 years old, and I was like, if I wait any longer, I'm just gonna have one child for the rest of my life because like this is just too much of an age gap. Like I really felt like I was starting from the beginning because Dylan Dylan's birth happened when I was so young. I was 17 when I had Dylan, and I guess I'll give a little backstory on that birth as well. So
Yeah.
when I was 17, I was for sure had like an interest in like holistic stuff. I ended up going to college for massage therapy and Chinese medicine. So, like safe to say that there was like interest in like natural birth and all of that sort of stuff. I remember watching The Business of Being Born when I was pregnant with Dylan, because it had just come out like a couple of years before, and I was like, I have to have a home birth. Um, and I remember like approaching my parents about it because obviously, I was under their insurance and all of that. And I was like, is this possible? Called the insurance. They were basically like, no, we won't do that. And
Yeah.
I was like really wanting to have a water birth. So I was like, well, can I do it in a hospital setting? They were like, no. So I got a midwife, and this midwife traumatized me because I was so young. I mean, I was 17 years old, and I was, wanting to like have this normal experience, but I couldn't because I was so young. And everyone, judged me, and so I was like dealing with a lot of that, and just like not feeling like good enough and taken seriously enough, and all of that. And one time I go for a prenatal appointment, and she basically told me like I need to stop eating so much. And
Wow.
yeah, she was like, "You're gaining way too much weight. Like this, you shouldn't be gaining this much so soon."
Hmm.
And now mind you, I was a skinny, skinny, skinny girl. These are like, we're talking like the skinniest Tiffany's ever been. Um, so I was maybe like 135, 140 pounds, and
What? That's
I'm
nothing.
5'9", like I was like skinny. So for me to have like put on weight, it was like a lot for me to even like allow myself, because I did have a bit of a eating disorder. Like I, was really into diet culture and like my body image and stuff. So her saying those things just like shattered me. So I left that appointment in tears, and I said I would never see her again. So I stopped seeing the midwife, and I just ended up getting an OBGYN. And it was a guy, and it wasn't what I was specifically looking for, but he delivered out of this hospital in Connecticut. And if you know anything about Connecticut, you know that Greenwich Hospital is a beautiful hospital. And I really wanted to, if I was going to have a hospital experience, I wanted it to be like at a really, really nice hospital. And this one
Yeah.
was. So I just settled for the OB, and he was cool. Like he really actually, considering that I was kind of just like surrendered to all of the, everything that comes with having an OB as your, care provider. Um, he always made me feel like respected and stuff. So it was a decent experience considering that I really wasn't like at that point trying to like advocate for a natural birth or anything of that nature. I was just like riding the wave, so to speak. So at 30, at at my due date, which was October 16th, he proposed induction. And I was like,
Mm,
okay, I mean, if that's what you think is best. And at that point, I didn't really know anything about going past your due date. And, I'm 17 years old. Like, I'm just
yeah.
like, yeah, like, let's just have the baby, right? Um, so Dylan ended up being born 5 days later, October 21st. We scheduled an induction and it was actually a really chill experience considering like I went to the diner, had like a really really good breakfast with my mom and my son's father, and went to the hospital. They gave me pit and I was just chilling. And I was like laughing, eating ices, just like super excited to meet my baby. And that was maybe at like 10 o'clock in the morning. And things started to pick up like like around like afternoon time, like 3. That's when I ended up getting epidural.
Mm,
Um, the epidural was semi-traumatizing because when they put the catheter, what is it called? Is it the catheter? I don't know. They put something in my spine. I don't know if it was the catheter or the needle itself, but I felt it. And you're not supposed to feel it because they like, they numb you first. And so I was like,
oof.
I kept saying ow and moving, and the anesthesiologist got freaked out and was like, "Oh, wait, you're not supposed to feel this." And so then they had to like redo the whole thing again. Um,
Oh.
and that was scary because at that point I had waited a while to get the epidural, so the sensations were intense and I was not mentally prepared whatsoever for pain. Like I did zero birth prep like
Yeah.
when I was pregnant with Dylan. Like never even really thought about like what do I do if I'm feeling this? Like no, at all. So I needed like to really be like I just needed a lot of support in that moment, and like it was just like really intense with the epidural situation. But after that, I was chilling, and then they were like, "Okay, are you ready to push your baby out?" And I was like, "Yes." And I just pushed him out in like 5 minutes. They were like, "Oh my goodness, you're like made to do this. Like you're made to have babies." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." Ha ha. Ha."
Yeah,
And
no duh. Like
my
all women are made to have babies.
exactly, right? Um but it just felt really good to feel like, "Oh, wow, I know how to do this," and, like, that wasn't so
Yeah.
bad. And yeah, and it came out super healthy and, breastfeeding journey was, like, really rough, but postpartum was probably the hardest, and so,
Mm,
like, I really struggled postpartum with Dylan, and so fast forward a bunch of years, 10 years to be exact, and, now we're trying to conceive Seraya, and I find out that I'm pregnant in February of 2021, or, like, ma either early February or late January, and I was super excited. We were super excited, and I'm like so my friend who was also my neighbor at the time was pregnant too, and so it was like I was like, "Yay, we're gonna be pregnant together." Um, I was planning to become a doula, so I had like already enrolled in the program to start in March. So I March rolls around, and March was a wild month for me because March was the month where I had a really supernatural encounter with the Holy Spirit. And this is a story for another episode, but I was like very heavily involved in New Age and witchcraft. And so in March, it was like, whoa, my whole world got like flipped upside down because I pretty much slowly started to exit out of the new age. It wasn't a quick switch for me. Like I
Yeah.
had a really supernatural encounter with the Lord, but I was not like convicted in that moment to become a Christian. I was really trying to fight it actually. So March, I'm like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I don't know what's going on. Then I get hit with HG, which is hyperemesis gravidarum in my
Mm,
pregnancy. So I basically went from like just feeling like lethargic and like, sleepy and all that to like throwing up from the moment I open my eyeballs until the moment I close them. And it was really, really hard. Like, I don't think that anyone or anything could have prepared me for that experience. Like,
yeah.
I, for one, didn't even know that that was possible. Like when I started to experience it, I was like, is there something wrong with me? Like, why is this happening? And so I started to think that it was spiritual warfare because the timing was just like so wild. It was like, everything was fine. And then I start to kind of turn to the Lord and I'm like getting like intensely sick. And
Whoa. I mean, do you still think it could have been spiritual warfare, or have you?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so I don't want to get too much into the testimony, but um I was doing really like heavy witchcraft at that time. And I was doing it for other people. Like people would pay me to cast spells for them and like do like these energetic like exchanges for like on behalf of them. And so I was like doing this stuff, not realizing that, I was involved in like demonic practices. So when I had this encounter with the Lord, I just stopped. Like I shut down my monthly um circles where I would do candle reiki magic for people and I would, like um I would make magic candles and sell them, and they would be for like love and for money um and so it was just like a lot of like spiritually dark things that I was like involved in, and I had experienced some like possession stuff. And so then like very quickly after that it was like boom, Jesus. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop doing all of that. And then I got like hit with like really, really, really bad like physical discomfort. I would be like up all night just like throwing up nothing, like because there was
Wow.
nothing left in me. I'd be like sitting in like a bathtub for hours because of how much the nausea pains hurt, like literally, like it was like turning my insides. Anyway, so that was intense. And at that point, I hadn't really given too much thought to what I wanted my birth plan to be like, because I just couldn't wrap my head around anything other than how do I stay alive today? Because
Yeah.
I wasn't able to drink water without vomiting. I wasn't able to eat without vomiting. Um, I was hospitalized at one point for it because I was so dehydrated. Um, and around like 26 weeks, I was like, well, all right, we gotta like start to really think about what we're gonna do with the birth. Like I knew I wanted to give birth at home, and I was like really wanting to free birth at this time. So I had been thinking and dreaming about free birth for a few years, like at this point leading up to, my pregnancy with Seraya. Like I would listen to free birth stories and just be like fantasizing about when I would experience something like that. So free birth was always like on the forefront of my mind. Um, but my husband at the time really, he was supportive, but he was also like, are you sure you can handle that? And I think that I didn't have that confidence at that time because I was so like I felt like I was in survival mode my whole pregnancy. And so just trying to wrap my head around the birth, I was just like, you know what? I might want to have a support person with me.
Yeah.
And so there was a doula that I was considering hiring to be that support person for me because I was like, I don't want to hire a midwife. I'd much rather like a super experienced doula who supports free births be like my support person. So, but now in the background, I'm also going through this spiritual transformation. And this doula was very, very, very involved in witchcraft. And
Yeah.
um and so it came to a point where I was no longer comfortable having her at the birth because I was starting to really like surrender to the Lord. Like, by 6, 7 months pregnant, I was like, oh yeah, Jesus. Like I was like reading the Bible. Like, I finally was like surrendering. So the new age was like looking darker and darker to me. And so I was like, if I have someone who's that involved in new age, like supporting me during my birth, like I won't feel safe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's really hard when you come out of the new age practices and then there are people around you who are still involved with it. It's just, it makes, I don't, for me at least, it would like make my skin crawl. And I'm like, but do you realize what you're actually doing? And yeah, especially during birth, you want to have you're so spiritually vulnerable as well as physically vulnerable. It's so important who you have in your space, you
mhm.
know?
Yeah, and I felt that. Like I felt like, oh, I'm gonna be naked. Like not literally naked, but like, you know,
But
I'm
also maybe
it's
literally naked.
and exactly. And literally naked, but that doesn't bother me. I was like, I don't care who sees me naked. Like, but I do care about like the spiritual environment that I'm
Yes.
creating in this space.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? Let's see if we could get a cool midwife. Like a midwife that's gonna respect my wishes. So I
I don't know
find
why I just thought of this, but I'm not a regular midwife. I'm a cool
I'm a
midwife.
cool midwife. Yeah. But I say it like that because it sounds silly, and that's what it was. It was silly, like,
Yeah.
that I was even thinking, like, "Oh, yeah, let me find a midwife who's down for me to free birth." Like, it
Yeah.
just I was trying to take 2 worlds and, like, and mesh them, like,
Yeah.
it's not realistic, you know? Um, but I found my midwife, and off the bat, like, it just felt very like, yes, it's her from the beginning. I didn't really, like, go searching and interviewing all of these midwives. Honestly, the thought of interviewing midwives made me feel so tired and just so, like, exhausted and, like,
Yeah.
sick. I'm like, "Nope, not doing it." Um so I had, like, a FaceTime with her. I said, "Look, I really want a free birth, but I don't feel comfortable doing it right now by myself, but I want the closest thing to a free birth that I could possibly have, but with, like, support there if I need it." Um And she was like, yeah, like, she didn't cringe when I said free birth, and she was like, "Yeah, like, I respect that," and, said things, and, asked her about all the intervention. I said, like, "Look, I don't want anything. I don't even want you, like, checking the baby's heart rate, like, at appointments with a Doppler. Like, if you wanna palpate here and there, like, you can do that, but I'm not, like, getting sonograms." Like, I just, like, really put my foot down from the beginning, and she was, like, down. Like, she was super on board. She wasn't like she said, like, "Hey, I might have to do this one time. Are you cool with that?" And I was like, "Okay, fine." Like, I'm fine with you doing the Doppler reading at, like, whatever, however many weeks it would be, um, so that she can have record of it. But yeah, like, all the testing, like, I opted to not have the testing done. Um, so she seemed really cool, like, considering. And so we started, having our prenatal appointments, and she kind of just felt like my therapist. We would just talk about my emotional state, and towards the end of my pregnancy, I was in a really rough emotional state. Um so I was like, things with me and my husband at the time were really challenging. And that was a big deal because he was my doula. Like, I wanted him to be my doula. I didn't want to, like, hire another person to be my support person. I just wanted it to be, my husband. And because I had taken the doula training during my pregnancy, I was, like, teaching him all the things, and trying to help prepare him as much as possible. I don't think that he was really really knew what we were about to get ourselves into, though.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like he was, like, overly confident about, like, being able to support me, and then when the time came, I think he was, like, kind of in shock. But it was cool. So, um, I totally didn't think I was gonna go past, my guess date. Um, at that time, I had been, like, really tracking my cycles, and I, like, was super regular and knew when I was ovulating, knew when we conceived. So I was, like, pretty confident about my due date, which is funny because my quote unquote due date for Seraya is the same due date I had for my son,
Whoa.
which is just weird because it's, like, 10 whole years later, And I, yeah, get pregnant basically probably on the same day, which I think is like my birthday.
Oh, okay.
Because
It's
my
just a
birth,
really fun month for you, Tiffany.
yeah, January is a wild month, guys. It's my birthday. Um,
It's my birthday, time to get pregnant.
so, but yeah, I end up going to 42 weeks, which I'm gonna like kind of backtrack a little because that was incredibly hard for me. I was not expecting it. I wasn't mentally prepared to be that pregnant. Um, and I feel like it's not talked about enough, but the fragile state of your mind being pregnant already is like a lot to,
Hmm.
kind of go through. The anticipation, just like everything, all of the nerves, all of the everything, thinking about birthing this baby, excited for the baby to come, postpartum, like there's so much that's already on your mind. And then it's like, but then having to continue being pregnant past a time when you thought you would no longer be pregnant. I really that was another thing I had never mentally like prepared for or thought about or even considered. I thought if anything, I was super confident I was going to have that baby earlier than we were expecting. And I don't
Yeah.
really know why. I don't know why I even had an expectation. But I did. And from 38 weeks to 42 weeks, I was basically losing my mind.
Well, it's a
So
trip, right?
yeah.
Because like, in your last bit of, pregnancy, you are so ready to meet your baby. You're so
Mm,
ready to not be pregnant anymore. And you hit like 38 weeks and you're like, okay, I could give birth like any day now, but also I could like be pregnant for another month. And
mhm.
that's a trip. That's like
Yeah.
hard to wrap your brain around. You're just in like a space of like any day now for a month. And yeah, a lot of women don't prepare for like the long haul. Um, and when it hits that 40, 41, 42 week mark, they start really sweating.
Oh, yeah.
I did want to ask, like, what what did you think your birth was going to be like? Like, what were you expecting for the birth?
Um, so at that time, I was preparing for, a really peaceful, nearly painless, like I actually didn't really touch on that part, so I'm glad that you asked because I so during my pregnancy, I also certified as a hypnobirthing childbirth educator. Um, and also by people, like I was supporting women as a doula. Um, and attended a couple of births, which is really cool. And being pregnant is wild and I loved it. But my goal ultimately was to have a painless birth. That was like the hypnobirthing had me convinced that like that was it. That was it. Like and I had read the supernatural pregnancy and birth book, which is like Christian based. And it's very much like if you like pray for it, you're gonna get it kind of thing. And
Yeah.
and so safe to say, like, I got myself involved in a couple of things, being the hypnobirthing and, like, reading that book.
Mm,
Both of those together really had me riding this, like, wave of, pain-free birth is the one and only way that this is gonna happen. And I for a really, really short labor. 5 hours was my number. Like, that was what I had been praying for. I was praying that I would go into labor by 38 weeks. Um, so there was a lot of things that, like, I had put expectations, and, the disappointment, it's hard. It's hard going through the disappointment when it's not what you planned for, and this is why, now as a birth worker who does support women and does, birth prep with women, that's a big thing for me in my birth prep, that I go over with women, like, what are the expectations that you have, and why do you have them? And
mhm.
how do we release those? How do we surrender? Because that is
Yes.
that is what we have to do. We have to surrender to pregnancy and birth because we are not in control. We are not in
Yeah.
control. And I was on the furthest opposite end of that when I was pregnant with Seraya.
Mhm.
And so I was really humbled through my experience. And I'm grateful that, the Lord had me go through this challenge and have to navigate through it, because now I can show up for women in such a unique way because of what I experienced. So to go back to all of that, like, yeah, at this point I'm like, wow, this is not going the way that I thought it was going to go. And so my husband at the time he was working in Virginia. He had a contract out in Virginia. He was there for about 2 months, and the plan was that he would fly back to New York City. We were living in New York City at the time. He would fly back, at the end of my pregnancy to be present for the birth, of course. And at my 38-week appointment, my midwife comes over and we're doing, like, the birth planning appointment, and my mom is there, and I'm, like, excited, but I'm also kind of, like, annoyed at this point, because one thing I didn't like about the prenatal care is the question. There were just so many questions asked of me, like, honestly, during my like, I didn't wanna have to answer to people. Like, I had that attitude of, like, "This is me, this is my body, like, why do I have to explain this to you?" You know? Which was,
Yeah.
like, another, like, really big, like, I don't know, sign of, like, I was so meant to just, like, free birth and have, like, a super, hands-off wild pregnancy kind of experience, because I never wanted to answer my midwife's questions. I always found it
Yeah.
to be very inconvenient for me, um, and I felt like I was being questioned because, like, I was being, like, tested to see, like, how prepared I was for what I was about to go through, you know? And
Yeah.
so I didn't really appreciate that. So I was a little irritable at this appointment, and she palpated my stomach and she was like, "Oh wow, you're having contractions right now." And I was like, "Oh yeah." And she
What? How can she know that you're
I
having contractions?
because
What?
my stomach was contracting, and she was like, I can feel the tightness in your stomach, like you're having contractions. And so then I was like, I mean, I guess so, but I barely feel it. So her bringing that to my attention now made it a thing. And I don't think it was meant to be a thing. I think that
Yeah.
this was just my body, what it's doing to prepare for when baby's coming. But her telling me that, and then like she kind of like started to pay more attention to see if they were consistent, and they did continue happening. So I
Okay,
got
so wait, this was 38 weeks?
this was at 38 weeks, yeah.
Okay.
So now starts the intense month of prodromal labor. Another thing I had never mentally prepared for or even considered for myself. I called my husband at the time, and I'm like, Chase, you need to get on a plane right now. Like, baby's coming. I don't know when, but like, you need to get on a plane because I'm not doing this without you here. So he he gets on a plane. He flies back home, and he's thinking, okay, I'll take a month leave from my job start
Hmm.
today, and then I'll go back. So, well, I didn't even have Soraya a month later. It was a long, long month of lots and lots and lots of practice labor. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is it." I even was like having the like diarrhea symptoms too, like
Wow.
that like when it's about to really happen, you're like on the toilet a lot and stuff
Your
like.
body's like clearing out. It's
No,
like, make
that was
way.
happening to me for a month. Like,
Wow.
I was losing my mind, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm just being really raw about it because this is reality, like
Yeah.
I had expectations, and I had very, very, very clear expectations that I was going to experience, and the Lord humbled me because I for real, because whoo, it was rough. So
Yeah.
all right, now we're like, getting closer and closer, but as the weeks are passing by, my midwife is, asking, okay, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you like doing enough like physical movement? Are you like having enough sex? Like, we need to get this baby out.
Oh,
And yeah,
gosh.
and I'm
Oh.
like,
Did she
and
ever like, I don't know. For me, I'm just like, can you just chill?"
yeah, no, that's how it felt.
Ugh.
I felt like very violated in the questions. Like I said, like the questions would really bother me because it it felt like, but like, you'd think I don't know how to do this? Like, my body is gonna do what it's gonna do, But
Yeah.
around 41 weeks, I was like taking all the tinctures. I was doing like the blue cohosh, black cohosh, like tinctures on and off. Um, drinking all the red raspberry leaf tea, eating 20 freaking dates a day. I mean, I was doing all the things, eating entire pineapples like in one sitting. Um, I was doing like the mile circuit. I was doing the thing. I wasn't just sitting like, watching TV all day. I was like determined to get things going too, because I was struggling mentally, like really struggling. So, um, I now we're also like, watching the clock hard because my husband's like, well, I have a month off, and like, the longer we go not having this baby, the less time I'm going to be able to spend with her when she's born. So that pressure was really like, heavy on me too, because I was like, wow, we didn't time this smart. Um, and then I also had really wanted my mom to be present for the birth. And she lived, at the time, we lived in Queens, New York, and she lived upstate New York. So she was about an hour and a half away. And so it just felt like all of the plans were not going the way we had planned. And that stress was really taking a toll on me mentally. So a few days before I hit 42 weeks, we go to an appointment. At this point, I had been talking to my midwife every day because she's like, we got to really stay on top of this. And to that point, I was like, listen, don't start this conversation about induction because it's not happening. Like, no. And
Yeah.
if you want to not be my midwife anymore, like say the word, but like I'm not getting induced. So,
Say it. Say
so,
induction. You're fired.
so, so I was being, at this point, irritable doesn't even begin to touch the level of attitude Tiffany was on. I was like, I dare you. Say something. And then my husband's like, Tiff, like, we kind of need her. Like, calm down. And I'm like, I don't need her. I don't need anything. So,
Do we though?
yeah. Do we really though?
Yeah.
Um, at the 42-week mark, I go into her office. Actually, no, I'm sorry. So a few days before that, we were in for an appointment. She goes, "Do you want me to do a cervical sweep?" So I sat and I like thought long and hard about this. I was like, okay, we're at 41 and like 5 days. And I'm like, either we get this going or I have to prepare for a free birth, which I'm not mentally prepared for at this point, with zero support people. And like, you know, to say that my mental state just got progressively worse throughout my pregnancy. So I really wasn't in a place where I wanted to do it alone. I didn't want to have
Yeah.
to jump into a crash course like couple days, before he gets here to try to like prepare. I just wasn't there. And so I was like, all right, like let's do the cervical sweep. And it was like at night, so we left and like we walked to go get food, and throughout the entire walk I was like in so much pain. I was having terrible
Mm.
cramps, and I was like sure that the baby was going to come because it was just like so intense. Baby didn't come. Um, at the 42-week mark, she was like, "Look, we're gonna have to like really start to consider all the options here." And I was like, "Look, I'm not going to a hospital. I don't know how many tell you. I'm not giving birth in a hospital. So, what are the other options?" And she's like, "Well, I can break your water here." And I was like, fine.
Yeah.
At that point, I had done all of the other more non-invasive, you know, kind of approaches, and it wasn't happening, and my baby girl just did not want to come at that time. She wasn't ready, and she was being evicted, and it was just
So
too
I
much.
also, I just want to ask, like, was there the sentiment from the midwife of like, okay, if you go past 42 weeks, I can no longer attend you at home?
Yeah, yeah. So that was basically like what the conversation was. It was like, we have to figure out what we're doing because come tomorrow, I can't support you.
Yeah.
So, and see, if that happened to me today, I'd be like, bet. All right. Like, I'm like free birthing. This is not even a question. I wouldn't even have a midwife. But at that point, that was scary for me to
Yeah.
hear. Because I had not been doing that kind of birth prep whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
also really heartbreaking because you spend like so long of your pregnancy talking with this woman and preparing for birth, and then you get to a certain point that's arbitrary, and she's like, "Okay, but if you don't give birth, like
yeah.
soon, I can't be with
It's
you." And
like
it's
the
just,
pressure's on.
yeah,
Like, what?
yeah. It's
Yeah,
it's really hard.
it really is. So I let her break my waters. During the actual process, I was really upset. I first of all, it's like a little like finger condom that she puts on, and it has like a tiny, tiny, tiny little needle on the tip of it. And so she
Wow,
goes
I'm so glad you
in.
said that. I've actually never heard that.
Yeah. And, she goes in, she tries the first time, there's no trickle. And so then she's like, I'm going to have to try again. It was really uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. And there was like, I don't want to say that she said this because honestly, at this point, it could have really been in my head. I'm not even sure. But I just remember feeling like, wow, that hurt. And I'm about to have a natural birth. These people probably think I'm not prepared for that. Like I like
Yeah.
people meaning like her and my husband, because those were the two that were present during the breaking of the water. So I just felt like really down, and I got up, and there was just like a lot of blood, and it felt wrong. It, like I didn't feel physically. I was in so, so, so much pain from her doing that. Um, really dilated. Like, I'm telling you, I don't think
Oh,
that my daughter was at all ready to come. I think she could have easily gone to 43, 44 weeks. And I know that
yeah.
sounds crazy, but this happens. our
Yeah.
body our bodies do not all like grow a baby in the same exact time period. And just want to say real quick that I had HG throughout my almost entire pregnancy. And when you have HG, you are not able to nourish your body the way that you want to. And I know that I was malnourished for a good portion of my pregnancy. And, although our body has reserves and our body has what it needs to grow a baby, I mean, clearly, my body still grew her, even though I wasn't nourishing my body. But I do think that it affected, the time period of how long it would take for her to
Yeah.
like be fully ready. And that's just, of course, like, uh, that I am having, but we.
Thanks for tuning in to the Birth and Rebirth podcast.
Make sure to keep up with us on Instagram at the Birth and Rebirth Podcast so you never miss an episode.
And check out our personal pages for our birth services and offerings.
We'll be back next week with another juicy conversation, inspiring birth story, or testimony of God's goodness.
Bye, y'all.